The goal that I have, should everything come to fruition with Twitter, is to have a service that is as broadly inclusive as possible.
Well, I like that he bought it. I've always liked him. I got along with him very well. I hear we're getting a big vote to also go back on Twitter. I don't see it because I don't see any reason for it.
As Donald Trump's Twitter account is reinstated, the social media company faces pressure over brand safety concerns and the spread of misinformation and hateful content as hundreds of employees resign. Hello and welcome to Inside America with me, Ghida Fakhry. Since he bought Twitter almost a month ago for $44 billion, Elon Musk, the company's new CEO, has faced growing criticism. Earlier this month, the company laid off around 50% of its workforce. And last week, Musk gave staff an ultimatum to either commit to working, quote, long hours at high intensity and be prepared to do extremely hardcore work or simply quit. The move spurred hundreds of employees to leave the company. Musk has also faced a backlash for his decision to reinstate Trump's Twitter account, which was permanently suspended following the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and, quote, the risk of further incitement of violence. In a poll posted on Twitter last Friday, Musk asked his 118 million followers if Trump's account should be reinstated. Of the 15 million votes, 51.8% were in favor and 48.2% were against reactivating the account. Meanwhile, several former employees at SpaceX, the aerospace company founded by Elon Musk in 2002, say they were fired in June for writing and circulating an open letter addressed to the executives of SpaceX. In the letter, they write that, quote, Elon's behavior in the public sphere is a frequent source of distraction and embarrassment. As our CEO and most prominent spokesperson, Elon is seen as the face of SpaceX. Every tweet that Elon sends is a de facto public statement by the company. The former SpaceX employees asked the company's executive team to, quote, publicly address and condemn Elon's harmful Twitter behavior, urging it to swiftly and explicitly separate itself from Elon's personal brand. Paige Holland-Thielen is one of the 5 former SpaceX employees who wrote and shared the open letter with other employees in June and were fired the next day. 4 additional employees were terminated in July and August. She is among 8 former employees who have filed complaints with the National Labor Relations Board, alleging that the company conducted, quote, a campaign of retaliation. She joins me now. Paige, you worked as an engineer at SpaceX for over 4 years. What made you decide to write that critical open letter to the executives of the company to take on essentially the powerful founder and CEO, Elon Musk? And did you think you would prevail?
So the momentum had been building, I think, for several months. There was an essay published at the end of last year that documented some of the some former employees' specific experiences with sexual harassment and sexual assault at SpaceX. The response from the company was entirely underwhelming. And then new allegations were published in May, specifically about Elon Musk himself and some of his sexual harassment, sexual assault allegations. And the conversations that had started internally around those 2 specific instances had just been really positive. A lot of people coming together and asking for change. The difference in May was that there were more voices who didn't typically participate in these conversations. So more men were joining in, more people were making themselves known as allies. And that's what let me know that this time it might actually be different. Maybe these conversations will not fizzle out once the next big milestone comes. So I proposed to a very large group that it would probably be in our benefit to organize together as employees to provide a unified front to communicate to executives and let them know how wide the scope of this problem was and how detrimental it is to the mission.
You and other employees have filed charges with federal regulators, accusing the company now of retaliating against you. How does the growing scrutiny that Musk is getting at Twitter affect your chances of winning the case? And even if you win, Musk will remain extremely powerful, won't he?
Yeah, that's likely. I think at this point, I want people to just, in general, feel safe to talk about issues in the workplace. I think that physical and psychological safety are both basic workplace rights that people should have. And I think that at SpaceX, there was a lack of both. And I think it's important to try and change the culture. I think that it's likely that we will never be able to change his behavior, but I think at least now there's a lot more conversation around how obviously problematic a lot of it is.
What was it like for you to work with Musk? I mean, how would you describe his work ethics? Because some say he was famous for sleeping on the factory floor at SpaceX. He might be doing the same at Twitter. He is, accomplishment-wise, and in terms of his personality, quite unique. Does he have a winning strategy for Twitter?
I think that he is doing a lot of the same playbook that he used at SpaceX and Tesla. And I don't think that it applies to Twitter. I actually never really directly interacted with him, but I could see the effects of his behavior ripple down. So he would send middle of the night tweets about different Starship deliverables, and my friends who worked on the Starship program would suddenly have their job deadlines changed overnight from a tweet that, was never discussed with anybody else in leadership as far as they knew. So timelines change overnight, deliverables change overnight, design decisions change overnight based on his Twitter. It seems like a lot of that is happening with Twitter itself. The verification check marks, no verification check marks, different color verification check marks. I don't know, some, ad hoc live design is going on while we're all watching it live on Twitter as these ideas are being brainstormed.
But he is so powerful that one single tweet can actually affect the value of the shares of his companies. And of course he knows that. Do you think that he tries to manipulate the market that way?
I think that he definitely does manipulate the market. Like, there is a definite impact on the market. I'm not entirely sure if he's doing it on purpose. I'm not sure if it's a claim that I would be willing to make, but it definitely is. There's a definite correlation there.
Why do you think would he be interested in running a social media company like Twitter? What drives him? Because here is someone who is seen by millions of fans as a genius. He's built a revolutionary car company. He sent reusable rockets into space in just a few years. Not just a first, but you could argue at a fraction of the cost of what NASA could have done. What drives him? Why would he be interested in running a company like Twitter?
I think Twitter has long been seen as a global town square. So I think having control over that makes him disproportionately powerful, even for a person as disproportionately powerful as he already is. I'm not entirely sure what the motivation was behind that. It doesn't really seem to fit into the paradigm of the rest of the things that he does, but
is that what's in it for him? More power, more influence? Does he have political ambitions? I mean, he is not a native-born US citizen, so he can't become president of the US. But do you believe he has political ambitions? And does he have the strategic skills to run a social media company?
I hope he doesn't have political ambitions. I don't think that what he's doing with Twitter is working particularly well.
Just finally, if you were to achieve one thing by speaking out publicly in the way you've done, what would it be?
I just want to contribute to the conversation around workers' rights. I think that labor in any form, whether it's manual labor, technical work, food service, any of that, it's the backbone of the economy. And I think that it's high time that employees are treated more like first-class citizens wherever they end up working, because Elon Musk gets a lot of credit for the accomplishments that SpaceX does, but it would be impossible without the people who are actually hands-on doing that work. And I kind of want to amplify that.
Paige Holland Thielen, thanks so much for coming on and for sharing your experience and perspective. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Meanwhile, over 60 civil rights groups have called on advertisers to suspend their marketing spending on Twitter to protest against Musk's decision to lay off thousands of employees. They argue that the decision will limit the company's ability to control problematic content and hate speech on the platform. Last week, the Global Alliance Against Digital Hate and Extremism, a coalition of more than 40 civil society groups, wrote a letter to Musk urging him to invest in appropriate global resources to curb the spread of hateful, misleading, and violent content. This follows a call made by the largest group of advertisers for a pause in Twitter ads following Musk's takeover due to what they say is trust and safety concerns. Ads make up around 90% of Twitter's revenue. So can Musk appease the growing concerns of advertisers by removing hate speech across the platform while remaining a self-declared free speech absolutist? My next guest is Brad Smith, founder of the Institute for Free Speech, a DC-based organization whose stated mission is to promote and defend First Amendment rights, including the right to free speech. He joins me now. Brad Smith, Trump's Twitter account has been reinstated. Now, whether he tweets or doesn't isn't the issue. Some Democratic lawmakers on the Congressional January 6th committee believe it's a terrible mistake to have reinstated his account because they say Trump used the platform to incite the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Should Trump's account have been reinstated? And is Twitter being used as a medium for political gains?
Well, of course, Twitter is being used as a medium for political gains. That's one of the main reasons people sign on and use it. Excluding Trump from Twitter,
but is that what it should be used for? I mean, it's also a platform to share information, accurate information.
It's a wonderful platform for doing so cheaply and inexpensively. And if you boot a person like Trump off, all you're going to do is create in his supporters a sense of grievance, a sense that they're not being heard. Why should they believe an argument when they can't even hear, so to speak, the counter side? So I think actually it's a good thing to have people like Trump or others whom some don't like on Twitter. That's part of what the First Amendment and free speech is all about.
But if you violate the terms of service, and if, like the former president, you have been suspended because of what Twitter itself deemed to be a threat of further incitement to violence, is it a responsible move to reinstate him?
Well, one of the questions with the terms of service is people feel like Twitter is very arbitrary in how those are enforced and when they're enforced, and a lot of the terms are very vague. It's true that Twitter, as a private company, can, of course, it's not subject to the First Amendment like the government would be. But there's a spirit, really, of free speech that's very important in the private sector as well, where we're willing to hear arguments and we're willing to listen to opposing points of views and count on people to make judgments and come to the right decisions. And I think that's the kind of case here. You've got to have confidence, if your arguments are correct, that they will win out the day. And you've got to have at the same time enough humbleness to realize that you may be wrong. For example, a lot of social media.
But you just said if your arguments are correct. Now, we know that Trump still maintains every statement he's ever made about the events surrounding January 6th and that the election was, quote unquote, stolen. He's violated countless rules. I mean, should it be free speech at any cost?
It should not be against the law to argue that an election was stolen, right? And other people have the obligation to show, no, that's wrong. And I don't think you're going to convince very many Trump supporters.
If it isn't factual, is it in the public good?
Yes, it's in the public good, because you're not going to convince Trump supporters that the election was not stolen by not letting Trump make that case. That's only going to leave them with the sense that, what are they covering up? Why are they doing this? Again, that's what I say. And plus, again, we have to have the humbleness to recognize that we may be wrong. For example, a lot of people thought that the Hunter Biden laptop was fraudulent, and they said so. And they censored people who tried to say otherwise. And yet, just in this last week, CBS News has come out 2 years after the fact and said, well, the Hunter Biden laptop maybe was authentic. So I think that shows that we shouldn't be so sure. We need to let people make their case and come to let listeners come to a reasonable judgment.
You say let viewers and listeners come to a reasonable judgment, but is it a responsible move on the part of Twitter today if reinstating Trump's account expands misinformation, given the central role that Twitter played in his election campaigns, his refusal to accept the election results in 2020?
Again, the nature of our First Amendment is such that we count on the free exchange of ideas, and we don't have so much confidence to be sure that we'll always be right. Twitter's a private company, so it's a little bit of a different analysis, but the fact remains that the spirit of the First Amendment, the spirit of free speech, should say that we should hear Donald Trump. The man is the former president of the United States. Millions of Americans follow him, and I don't think you get anywhere by trying to censor this.
All right, Brad Smith, good to have you on the program. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
As Trump's Twitter account was reinstated, the decision was widely criticized by Democratic lawmakers on Capitol Hill and condemned by civil rights organizations. So where do you draw the line between freedom of speech and incitement to violence? And does the First Amendment protect the right to free speech on Twitter and other social media platforms? Nadine Strasser is the former president of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. She is a constitutional law professor at the New York Law School. She is also the author of the book, Hate, Why We Should Resist It with Free Speech. She joins me now. Nadine Strasser, you are a free speech scholar, but does the right to free speech apply to social media companies like Twitter, or is that right enacted to protect citizens from government censorship, which has very little to do with social media?
Ghida, you're absolutely correct that the First Amendment free speech guarantee in the U.S. Constitution only protects us against censorship by government. That said, for those of us who care about having meaningful free speech rights in a society where so much power is wielded over communications by the giant tech platforms, we have to find other legal tools and other pressures to create free speech protection in very important online environments.
But what could these other legal tools be if the First Amendment, as you say, only protects citizens from government censorship? Then private sector entities like Twitter have no First Amendment obligations. Where does it leave free speech? And who decides ultimately what constitutes free speech?
Well, free speech constitutes the right of each individual, each mature individual, who is mentally competent to make his or her own decisions about what ideas and information to convey and what to receive, and which ones not to convey and which ones not to receive, and not to be subject to some centralized gatekeeping power, whether that power be wielded by a government censor or by a tech platform. It has the same adverse practical impact on all of us if we are deprived of making our own choices. Now, one of the remedies that's been suggested, interestingly enough, by experts all across the ideological spectrum is to treat these giant platforms as public utilities or common carriers, similar to the way that the landline telephone companies were treated in the last century, that they are such essential infrastructure, so important for everybody to have meaningful participation in our society, in our government, in our culture, that government should regulate them to be sure that they act as neutral conduits for all information, all ideas, all speakers, treated fairly and non-discriminatorily.
But is that realistic, though? Is that realistic? Can government regulate tech companies? And should tech companies ultimately decide which posts to display, which users to suspend, which accounts to deactivate? I mean, it is a form of private sector censorship, dictatorship even, isn't it?
You're raising a very important question, which is that not only do these platforms not have a First Amendment obligation to protect the speech of their users, they also, as communications companies, have their own First Amendment free speech rights to make those kinds of editorial decisions. But I do think it is definitely worth investigating whether they should be regulated as common carriers. It's a very hotly debated issue, and it's just one possibility. Another possibility, Ghida, is what Elon Musk has proposed to do as the new owner of one of these powerful platforms, and that is to voluntarily, as a matter of company policy, protect the same free speech rights on his platform that the government would be required by the First Amendment to protect. So in other words, the capitalist market would provide an option for those of us who want a free speech protective platform to opt for Twitter, if in fact that is the direction that Musk goes.
And in many respects, these tech companies have become more powerful than government. The government can't simply shut down a news outlet at will, yet Twitter can shut down accounts whenever it wants. I mean, something does
in the
look
past,
wrong.
government officials used to shut down media outlets. Now we have media outlets like Twitter and Facebook shutting down even the most powerful person in the world at the time, namely Donald Trump. That is extremely dangerous not to have them subject to any kind of constitutional limitation. Not only is there no free speech protection, there's no due process protection.
And it's very much part of an ideological struggle between liberals and conservatives. Should social media be regulated? Because Texas and Florida have passed laws taking aim at social media companies and how they moderate content. If these laws, though, do go into effect, social media companies will be forbidden from censoring or prohibiting certain content in the name of free speech. Is that the solution?
It's a solution worth exploring, but I'm very leery about it, Ghida, because in the past, when the government has had power to regulate communications outlets such as the broadcast media under the so-called fairness doctrine, it sounds good, right? The goal is to be fair toward those who use the platform, but the record disclosed that government actors, not surprisingly, were wielding their regulatory power selectively to suppress those media outlets that were critical of their policies. And we hear Democrats putting a lot of pressure on the social media companies to take more conservative-oriented speech and speakers off. And conversely, we hear Republicans exerting a lot of pressure on the social media companies to take down messages that they see as inconsistent with their political values. This is
and so can you be fair to all sides? Because conservatives, as you say,
that
have long argued that these platforms discriminate against them by banning or suspending them. It's all part of a wider information war.
There's a lot of debate about whether that is factually true, but regardless of whether it is, the fact remains that these companies now have legal power to do that. They would be within their complete legal rights to say, we are going to deplatform all ideas that we disagree with, and we happen to disagree with all conservative ideas or all liberal ideas. That now would be part of their editorial discretion. And that's why I have some sympathy for efforts to at least consider regulation that would prohibit them from engaging in what we call viewpoint discrimination, which, if the government did it, is the worst possible violation of freedom of speech, because it's up to we, the people, to make our own decisions about which views are false or true, are good or bad, not for the government or tech giants to dictate those views to us.
Nadine Strossen, good to have you on the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
If the press in democratic countries has ever been the fourth estate, expected to speak truth to power and keep the powerful in check, its status has been gradually supplanted by social media. With their extraordinary reach to hundreds of millions of consumers in real time, these platforms, which remain largely unchecked and difficult to monitor, are putting democracies before difficult choices. And more than just difficult choices, these new technologies are threatening democracies with overpowering algorithms, always a few steps, possibly even a few years ahead of any legislation meant to ensure that social media, as a public good, doesn't morph into a public poison. Take Twitter, only the 15th most popular social media platform worldwide, but a powerhouse and arguably a power broker in the United States and in US elections. Delisted from the stock market after its acquisition by Elon Musk, Twitter is, for now, a formidable, if dangerous platform. Formidable because of its usefulness, dangerous because of its mischievousness, maybe even more so now that it is controlled by just one idiosyncratic man. And so, in short, while the topical question now is the Trump-Musk relationship via Twitter and its potential impact on the 2024 American presidential election, the real question is the long-lasting and disruptive role social media is bound to play in political life here in the US and everywhere else. And when you consider that bots, troll farms, hackers, and intelligence services are all feeding the beast, and that fake news is 70% more likely to be retweeted and reshared than accurate information and travels 6 times faster, especially when it comes to political content, with or without Trump, with or without Musk, the genie is out of the bottle and it is unlikely to be tamed anytime soon. That's all for this week from me, Ghida Fakhry, and the team. Thanks for watching.